In this video, we're going to show you how we built this awesome D&D table in a week for just about $600. First off, we are not professionals. This is simply documenting the process of how we created this table, but it may provide some insight if you're planning on creating a table of your own. If you want to try doing something like this on your own, make sure you have the proper knowledge and safety equipment to do so, though we may not have sometimes. Now, we definitely took a lot of inspiration from Critical Role's table. We really thought the shape would work well with our camera setup as we record our sessions and some other videos as well. This design includes cubbies for extra storage, just like Critical Role's does, and we also added a TV in the center as an alternative option to physical maps.
We began the process by getting the dimensions of the room and deciding how big the table should be. The table's design was put onto an online drawing software so we could visualize the size of the table inside the room. We wanted the table to be as big as possible with enough room for us to walk around. After some time, it was decided that our table should be 7 foot by 7 foot, as our room is about 10 foot by 10 foot.
The best way to start the build process was doing several days of research to determine which materials would work best for us and fit in our budget. Then we made our first of several trips to Home Depot, initially to see the different types of materials, so we could accurately pick what would work best for this project. It was challenging trying to know what would work best based on what we found on the internet, so it was just easier to go in the store. We will list all the materials that we found links to in the description down below. Some of those will be Amazon affiliate links, so thank you for your support if you decide to use them.
For the tabletop, we chose to purchase 4 sheets of 23 by 32 inch pine plywood. We opted for the thickest possible sheets that we could find as we wanted a solid table with a good structural integrity. For the frame of the table, we decided that 2x4s would work best, so we purchased 8 2x4s at 8 feet long. This specific length resulted in the least waste for the best price for our table. For the legs, we wanted strength, so we bought a 10 foot 4x4 and an 8 foot 4x4. Once again, this gave us the best cost to least waste ratio to get 5 legs at about 2.5 feet long. Some of the challenges we faced were trying to get the best quality wood, as we had to sort through to find sheets and boards that weren't warped or damaged in some way. We also purchased the necessary screws and fasteners to assemble the project.
Once we got all the necessary materials, the build process could finally begin. For the design of the table, we opted to make it sandwich style by creating a frame, then placing plywood above and below it, as this method catered to good structural integrity. We started by laying out all the plywood on the floor to measure out the correct size. Because the plywood comes in a 4x8 piece, we would need to butt the 2 pieces up against each other to achieve the necessary dimensions to cover the frame. However, due to the interesting shape of our table, we're going to have to cut out 1 sheet on each side of the table with a jigsaw to fit the shape of the table where our DMs would sit. Along with that, we would also need to cut each side down from 8 foot to 7 foot to fit the table. We found after using the jigsaw for several hours, you lose all feeling in your hand as the jigsaw takes a while to cut.
The hardest part of cutting the plywood was incorporating the TV section into the center of the table. The main decision on the TV cutout was if the TV cover should be cut into 2 the same size cutouts, or cut it to fit in line with the shape of the other plywood sheets. After deliberation, we decided it looked better to go against the symmetrical look of the TV cover. To achieve this look, we decided it was easier to build a TV frame, which is described later on, and then use those exact dimensions to trace out the lines on the TV. While ideally everything would be built exactly how we planned, one of the things Michael and I joked about was if everything was within 1/8 of an inch of our original plan, then we were doing perfect. To make the TV cover sit flush, we decided to split the difference between the 2x4 width and have the cover sit on the top part of the frame to be best supported. We were extremely satisfied and a little shocked with how good the plywood turned out, considering it was our first time using a jigsaw.
After all the plywood had been cut, it was time to begin getting the 2x4s ready to be assembled into a complete frame. This process started by measuring the material to figure out how to cut each board down to the right sizes and angles for each piece of the frame to fit together. We started by creating a backbone of the table by putting 2 2x4s perpendicular to each other. Then to start strengthening this backbone, we had 2 more pieces to box off this section of the frame. From there, the cubbies began to take place as they were added to the sides of the backbone and spaced equally apart so that way each player at this table would have a perfectly equally sized cubby. We spent a lot of time on this part, trying to make each cubby absolutely perfect, working down nearly to 1/32 of an inch, only for some parts to end up 1/8 of an inch off. Bummer. Old habits die hard. Anyways, from there, we continued to add the frame by boxing the opposing corners from the main box portion. After that, we measured and cut the runners to start going towards the DM's seating area. This is where things started getting challenging as we were approaching the part of the build where things needed to be precise, otherwise one side of the table wouldn't line up with the other side. Piece by piece, we added 2x4s to the frame to start creating the DM's cubby and seating area. After some time, we had finally joined the frame of the table together.
However, we were far from having this frame being complete, as we still needed to add the trusses at the center to form the area where the TV would be placed, as well as add rigidity to the frame. We started by building the frame for the TV and placing it in the center of the table frame. We tried our best to get a rectangle to fit in a triangle and be perfectly centered. So this portion of the build took some time, as there was a lot of measuring and finagling and measuring to get within our 1/8 inch. We're not framers, good enough standard. It worked out though. After screwing everything together, the frame for the table was complete.
With the frame complete, it was time to build the legs of this table. In the design process, we determined how high to make the bottom of the table to comfortably fit our legs, as well as have enough room for the cubbies. With this measurement in mind, we began measuring and cutting the 4x4s down to size using a table saw. Once that was complete, the legs needed to be cut in a specific way to be accepted into the brackets, so that way the table and the legs could be mated together. The top 4 inches of the legs had to be recessed a little less than an inch to cleanly fit inside the brackets. We had done a lot of research on the legs and found that this process was the most affordable and easiest option without sacrificing the length of the legs. At this point in the build, the table was nearly complete and almost ready to be assembled. So now it's time to create one of the final puzzle pieces, those being the brackets that attach the legs to the table. The process began by cutting enough pieces of 3" by 3" steel square tube using a bandsaw to produce 5 brackets. This process involves cutting some pieces at 90-degree angles and some at 45-degree angles in relation to the side of the tube. The 90-degree pieces are for the main body of the bracket, while the 45s are the sections for the bracket that will bolt to the table. After prepping the pieces, they were ready to be welded together to create some very stout locations to mount legs to the table. We then touched them with a few coats of hammered silver spray paint, which gives a cool texture that fits the vibe we're going for on this table. One thing we learned when building these brackets is though it was cool to make something custom, and they turned out great, if we were to do this again with the same time restraints, we would just buy brackets and save time.
Next up, the table needed to be stained and clear coated. First, we coated everything in a mahogany stain and poly in 1. Additional coats were applied to all of the exposed portions of the table to add additional color and protection. We did mess this up several times by painting too much on, letting it drip off the side, or painting against the grain of the wood. So we had to sand away some of the stain and start over again to get it to match evenly across the whole table. Lastly, we did a few coats of just polyurethane to all of the exposed portions to add a seal and a nice gloss finish to the whole table. And then finally, after a week of cutting, sanding, staining, and fabricating, the table is finally ready to achieve its final form. Once we got the frame where we wanted to, we began screwing it together bottom side first. Then we installed the legs to the table using bolts and nuts along with washers to prevent the bolts from pulling through the table. Once that was done, we flipped the table over and screwed the top of the table to the frame. And at this point, the table was essentially complete. It functions perfectly and it looks awesome. The only thing left we had to do was add some green felt to the inside of the cubbies and under a cover for the TV. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see everything we do at this table, please go ahead and subscribe. Eventually, we will do a full room tour, and when that video comes out, it will be right here. But until then, it'll just be another video that YouTube thinks you might like.